Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Download with Joe. As always, with Joe as a co-host, and we're joined by another Boulderite, Jay Wratten from WSP. I don't want to butcher the introduction, so I think it's best to hand it over to you, but it sounds like you've got a couple of roles, probably one more relevant to what we'll discuss today, and we'll get into that. But yeah, do you want to quickly introduce yourself, Jay, just so people can understand your background?
Sure. So hi, everybody. Jay Wratten, as Lewis mentioned. Is it Lewis or Louis? We didn't even ask.
Lewis. Yeah.
I live in Boulder, Colorado. I work for WSP. We are a global engineering firm, and we'll get into that a little bit. My role that is probably most relevant to this audience is that I lead our Smart Places offering around the world. So think of that as how do we attack the right markets, think about the right end markets, have the right skills in place, partner with the right people to serve our clients and make sure that we're helping them on their journey while we're on ours.
Yeah, and Jay, have a nice office in Boulder, small town, so we see each other every once in a while. And I think the first time I came to visit you, the building next door, they were doing a complete HVAC overhaul, and it was like near and dear to my heart because there were people in your office just watching them put new air-cooled chillers on the roof, and I thought, I would have been doing that too. And then we started talking about it. So and then you also had.
I'm looking at that building right now, and it is still under construction. We are actually doing the commissioning on that project, so I get to see we're using a new digital platform on that one where our guys walk around with like a camera on their helmet, and it does 360 camera shots and records time over time, so you can look at point on the floor plan how it has changed over time and go back and look at when stuff went in. So
interesting.
It's actually been a neat project to case study some of the emerging construction tech that we can use.
So they're walking progressively as the project is going on, and then you're finding what's changing in between a month ago and this month, for example. Very interesting.
Yeah. The particular platform we're using, you can put like a pin and say, show me every shot from when our guys have walked this point over the entire life cycle of the project, and then see. If you're trying to look back and say, what is between the studs on this wall that's now been closed up, you can go back and find that.
Yeah.
The picture.
That's great. I remember the other thing that you showed me, I think this is years ago now, but the little living lab you have of just trying different smart tech and trying to just get as many vendors to just deploy in your building or your space. And I think that this was coming out of the pandemic. So it was kind of like a project before the pandemic that maybe was priority a little bit. So.
We felt, and we still feel that, we're a consulting engineering firm, right? So we don't build any hardware. We don't sell any software platforms per se. And so when our clients come to us for advice, it's incumbent on us to know, is what it says on the tin what it actually can do? We were finding, particularly early days in smart buildings, we're going to talk about the market as we get going, but there was a lot of people in the 2000s and teens that stood up IoT tech vertically integrated as some sort of platform. They would come into our office and say something like, we have this, or it was, and then we'd say, oh, cool. Can you send me the API documentation so that we can review it? And they go, the API is actually on the roadmap. We don't have an API yet. And so we started to get nervous about how mature is this technology that we're looking at. That was kind of the birth of like, hey, we need a lab that we can test this stuff in so that we're comfortable, one, that the advice clients is grounded in truth. Two, what we found is that, and at most smart buildings are vertically integrated. You've got a sensor tied to a gateway, tied to a platform that does an analysis.
Yep.
But you sits in connecting all those things up and looking for the sort of the commonality in the data. There aren't vendors out there trying to solve that problem because they don't get paid to solve that problem. We get paid to solve that problem.
Right. It's fascinating. I mean, I think what you're describing, and we'll just kind of keep going on this thread because it's quite interesting and it touches on a lot of the things we wanted to talk about anyway. You do have, and I would say over the past 10 years, the same timeline or about the same timeline you're describing, you have had a lot of ambitious vendors that have built something interesting. And I would say, by no means would I point to it as vaporware, right? Even not having an API, I mean, that it's still a real product, just maybe not completely fully there yet. You have a lot of sometimes I think that stretches into talking about what's available versus what's going to be available soon. And I've even seen that at roles I've had in the past role. That's not available yet, but the view is internally sometimes, let's talk about it like it is, because by the time we have to deploy it, we actually will deploy it. But having that ground truth of just what does this actually do? And more to the point, Does this work well for a hospital? Does this work well for a university? Does this work well for commercial real estate versus corporate real estate? Those all have nuances or differences that mean your product might work better or worse, or just the numbers may pencil out better or worse. And that's, I'm sure you see that because you're working across a lot of different types of assets.
I think that clients in different asset priorities, and we need to be aware of kind of like what are their concerns. Financial services have really strict IT policies, cybersecurity policies. You're not going to throw a device on work that hasn't been pen tested.
Yep.
Commercial real estate, there's a little bit more room in there because, usually you've got a dedicated network. It's a building network. They're still worried about it, but they don't have the level of scrutiny, maturity generally. So yes, we've had to become aware of what's important for our clients, what regulatory agencies oversee their work, healthcare being, prime example, right?
Yeah.
And that changes what would or would not fit as a solution in any client's building or portfolio.
Yeah. You think, while we're again going on this thread, talking on another podcast about different categories of technology, and sometimes there's a term of art that is kind of clapped into, right? And like digital twin is one that you've probably had a lot more experience than the average smart building or just technology practitioner in real estate with digital twin technology. What I've found is there's a real use case there. There's real products there. But I've definitely, in the course of top vendors, in the course of going to events, heard people tell me things, oh, this is what we do. It's our digital twin. And sometimes it's, right, which I would argue is not at all a digital twin. And I think that on one hand kind of is a good example of what we're talking about. It is a little confusing as a buyer to figure out on your own, I need a solution to solve X problem. That is very different than I need a digital twin. But also if you're trying to solve the problem and everyone's coming to you saying, oh, we have a digital twin, you have to spend a lot of time on what it actually mean.
Agreed. Smart building project we ever did. Commercial developer went to a conference, came back and said to his team, I went to this smart building. What is it and when can I have one? And that was sort of like the act of what turned into 6 or maybe 9 months of engagement just to define what were the uses they were hoping to solve. Digital twins, I point out, is well understood, I think, by we're deep into it, and well misunderstood market. And my point of view is not to get dogmatic with a client about what isn't a twin, but to focus on the outcomes we're trying to create and solve those. And twin or a smart building or a
right.
Okay, you can call it what you want. I don't know that the term necessarily matters as much as the value that we're creating.
Do you think there has to be a level of maturity from a company or a client who is wanting their version of a digital twin? Because when I think about smart building, I think about the easier technology to adopt and deploy versus creating a digital twin.
If I had to map the maturity level that the client would need to have, or the consultant who's managing it for him, or the vendor who's managing it for him, I do agree that I would say at its core is something that is gathering the IoT type data, the time series data coming off of systems and analyzing it. When you jump to a twin, you have added in simulation and prediction as, I would say, the sophistication on that IoT data. You're now taking some model for how the asset should perform, looking at the data that is coming in and predicting what might happen in the future, or simulating different potential outcomes, and a higher level of sophistication in terms of the software stack and in terms of the skills you would need to actually get out of it as an owner or user.
Got it. And just to zoom out very quickly, your role within WSP, could you give context as to how big your remit is in terms of the US role and kind of team size? Because hopefully we'll get into this at some point on the podcast, but you were talking about some of the projects that WSP are either have won and are going through right now or potentially trying to win. It's just obviously quite a big scope across the built environment.
Yeah, so maybe there's two parts to that answer. Who is WSP and what is my role?
Yeah.
For the audience that might be unaware, WSP is a global consulting engineering firm. We had host of services from environmental consulting to transportation planning to building design to smart building design, as we're here to talk about. We are about a 70,000 person headquartered in Canada and Montreal, big presence in the US, maybe 20,000 people, strength in Europe, APAC, South America, pretty well everywhere you're seeing a fair amount of infrastructure, you're going to find as a presence. I think we have something like 500 or 600 offices, maybe even more than that globally.
Yeah.
My role,
extremely large company. I mean, tens of employees, I think. Right?
Yeah, 70,000 employees.
Yeah. 70. So, okay.
So I think, and this is not, I think this is true. I think we are the largest consulting engineering firm in the world at the moment. That's not necessarily a mountain we set out to climb. I think we're the best in terms of our client outcomes and our shareholder performance. We're publicly traded, which is another interesting twist, to how we look at things like risk and acquisition and so forth. You did ask about my role. So I've got two roles. I am the global smart places lead. And in that role, my job is to help understand where's the market, what do the clients look like, who's buying, which markets are shrinking, and then more importantly, how do we best markets? What skills do we need? What partnerships do we need in order to approach win or good work for our clients? I have a regional lead as well and representing the US across all sectors, and that's an interesting twist because it gives me a remit and the opportunity to other sectors that smart buildings wouldn't touch, right? So that's been the really cool thing, is to look, how are we looking at intelligent mobility and helping team, clients like Colorado Department of Transportation think about transportation in the Front Range where Joe and I live. And how are we seeing, vehicle to technology, which is also sensor driven, move forward. And the things that from that and apply in buildings. I think from a smart places perspective, the most interesting things that's happening to me are like transit fees, industrial facilities, airports, sit right in that cross section of like horizontal meets vertical, where smart buildings can really bring outcome for our users. But it's a really hard market to sit in because those are complicated facilities. But that's really where WSP excels.
Got it. And with WSP and just your role in general, covering multiple industries, specifically real estate, commercial or corporate real estate, where would you say that asset fits or sits when it comes to technology adoption? Because I think it's obviously a sweeping step, but I think I'd have a good argument in saying that we're quite far behind in tech adoption to get quote unquote smart buildings, even further behind if we want to talk about smart cities. What's your general thought?
I think that commercial real estate in specific has a couple of inherent challenges that have held it back. And I'm sure this has come up on other podcasts, but probably the biggest one is the tenant land sort of split of responsibility. Where I've seen in general tech up more quickly in other markets is in owner-operator environments. Think hospitals, think airports, as we talked for, states. You generally have, I think, better in terms of investing in technology, either in the design and construction or over the life cycle of the asset, where you're also going to reap all of the benefit of that gain. Commercial real estate, inherent challenge. The owner is really trying to attract tenants, and that is always going to complicate and be a headwind, I think, for commercial real estate. I think as well, you see a lot of properties over more quickly in CRE. And so you see a lot of short holds, and that all changes your math on ROI and whether you're really willing to invest.
Yeah. I mean, it's, it kind of touches on there. I think I mentioned to you, there's this graphic in, it was from Belimo, their capital markets day, maybe from last year, where they talked about, it's kind of complicated when you first look at it, but they're looking at the time across the x-axis, right? So that's like the phases of the building from design, construction, use, and then they talk, the costs are the y-axis, and there's a line for cost influence, there's a line for cost, and they're generalizing, right? To your point, Jay, you'd probably say, well, that's going to be different if you're selling the building, because they, I think, estimate the use phase of the building is 50 years, right? So if you're real estate, you're planning to sell it in 3 years once you've gotten it up to a certain level of occupancy, you're not looking at 50 years of cost, you're looking at 3 years of operating costs. But the point of that was the cost influence is extremely high during the design phase, and the real costs are extremely high during the use phase. Now, the time is different, right? It takes a couple years to build and design a building, it's 50 years to use it. So of course you would expect the cost to be higher. Their point was there's a huge amount of HVAC spend, and they being, valves, active devices. But I thought in general, what I took away from that was that's one reason it's hard to get smart building technology into a building. The additional marginal dollar, or the marginal dollar, might be viewed as like, oh yeah, we can't spend that, even if it's going to save a huge amount of money for the next years.
Yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with the curve, and it's certainly about, in the design phases, like we have a lot of cost in even just facade orientation, right? If you think about how are we shaping the building, sets it up for you're never going to rotate the facade, right? So there are decisions being made very early on that have a significant impact in the life cycle of the facility. Now, I think as a market, we're getting better at running those life cycle, studies and looking at, what is the balance of operational carbon in the decision making. Technology is tough. Part of the challenge of technology, is you're looking at two different pots of money. Typically, you've got a construction to fund the CapEx on the building. The beneficiary of tech is the OpEx. So when I'm thinking about a client and thinking about within their organization, you've got the developer, real estate developer lead. Job is to deliver the project on time, under budget. That is their primary goal. Typically, that over to an operating team, not have had a lot of influence on the design and construction of the facility, who then picks it up and runs with it. When I'm making my pitch for why we should put technology in now, I am saving the op team money. And what I need to do is involve or not and make sure they are there to champion. And that's why I've had better success with owner operators, because there's a little bit more connectivity than when you're like a developer who has an outside FM team who has a different contract. You might have some challenges. So that's that we struggle with. One of the areas that I'm pretty passionate about is that I think the firm need to do everything we can to make install technology day two. So when I think about that, and when I talk to my teams about that, I'm smart ready. Necessarily a smart building today, but we are building a building with the right hooks and the right bones to allow our clients to add technology down the road, do day 3, day 100, whatever it would look like, and not have to go back and redo a bunch of stuff. If we've done our job right, simple plug and play. It's not as easy as it sounds, of course, and we all know that, but that mission that we've typically taken to try to get around that sort of, I don't want to call it a conflict of interest, but competing priorities that we see in a client side.
Yeah, but that also fits the smart ready point. And I think even when I was at JCI over 10 years ago, we informally used that term or a term like that, right? But there it was more the costs to make the building smart ready. And that was oftentimes going to buildings that hadn't planned like you're planning. And there was a lot of upgrades required to make it smart ready so that then you could deploy an analytics platform. Interestingly, a lot of them and their peers are talking about how much pull-through revenue there is. And I've even written that it kind of cuts both ways, right? Like, yes, you need to spend a bunch of money to get the building in some cases to deploy these analytics packages. So that is more pull-through revenue, but that also is dissuading some buyers from actually buying the analytics platform because they say, oh, well, that cost, there's ROI, but enabling costs, there's not an ROI there. So I think to your point, doing it all up front makes a lot of sense, or trying front.
Certainly trying to make the right decisions. About trends, I think we're seeing more pressure for interoperability and open standards from not only the design and construction industry, but also from the owner side. They're recognizing. I don't like the term vendor lock because vendors are really, technology providers are part of the discussion here, and I think they get a bad when you sort of vendor lock like they're intentionally to make their key. But why wouldn't they? I mean, that's every salesman out there in the world is trying to make a sticky sale.
Yeah,
so
true.
I don't fault them for that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of lock-in phone, for example, right? Like,
yeah, and I was just going to say, I think the vendor lock, the frustration, at least from where I sit in the space, comes more from the big incumbents, the the companies that have been around for many years versus these new disruptive technology vendors who are perhaps trying to right the wrongs of some of these other legacy businesses.
Agreed. I mean, I know firms that have had a history of moves that felt defensive versus offensive. I would rather partner with a technology provider who has an offensive strategy because I think it's more interesting and I think we see more outcomes for the clients. But yeah, I mean, the history, I think, Lewis, you were about to mention, I'll go to many meetings with clients and they talk about wanting a fully interoperable open building, and then they pull out their iPhone and write a text message.
Right.
And I think
I mentioned,
a lot of the experience that they're getting from an iPhone is because it's orchestrated, because the user experience.
Right.
And
they say that.
It's somewhat funny that that you see this like really strongly held position that our buildings have to be entirely open, when in many other parts of our lives we're quite happy to take ecosystem.
That's such a good point. I'd never even thought of that either. That's really interesting.
Yeah. The other quick follow-up I had, talking about making the smart ready, I mean, my sense is the benefit also is when you look across the array of building owners and then you have, there's different types of buildings, there's different stakeholders involved. I mean, there's a lot of variation just in how the market is defined or structured, not even getting to all the vendors that are trying to serve maybe a niche or start with a niche. But it sounds like part of your strategy, even if you didn't explicitly say it, is meeting where they are, right? So you might not be ready to deploy smart building technology today as a building owner, but you may see the value in making the building smart ready so that in 3 to 5 years or more or less, it's an easier path. And so you don't have to go in necessarily and say, you should be this sophisticated. We're building your building to that level of sophistication. You can instead say, you might become more sophisticated, you may not, but we can meet you where you are. I mean, that wasn't explicitly what you said, but Jay, that's kind of what I hear you saying as well in terms of how you approach this market.
Oh, 100%. Our view on clients is that we want to build long and do more work with less clients. And I don't think that that's unique to a WSP. I think the consulting industry is a trusted advisor for our clients. That also means while we're here to how they should, we have to meet them where they are. And it's always worth reflecting that we building design every day, right? All week taking vendor meetings and talk about the latest and greatest. We go to conferences. It's our job to be on the cutting edge of what's out there. Our clients may only build a new facility once in a lifetime, right? Consider that many of our clients might be coming in from a business, right? That is a very real, conversation. This building, they've kept it on a shoestring budget for years and years.
The campus right here in town, I mean, they have a lot of pneumatics, as most universities probably would, especially when you're, teen millions of square feet. Yeah, keep going. Yeah, it's very common.
I'll just sort of say that I think, one, we have to meet us where we are. It's our job to help them understand kind of where the market, but we can't sell them on a dream that, one of my old colleagues, we can't sell them on a mission to Mars when they don't even have a rocket ship, right? Got to get them to where they need to go. And I think the tech, which is where we've probably focused more than we should on the engineering decisions, the solution architecture, the IDL, all the stuff, that's actually a lot easier than the change management of like getting our clients to think about how they're going to run the thing when we hand it over. And I want to come back to that because I think the need for our industry to sort of, but I bet the road behind us is in smart building built and left alone because.
Do you think it gets easier, that change management education piece, as we start to see more smart building showcases or case studies, whereas over the last 5 or 6 years, there haven't been as many as what there should, because some of the vendors or some of the consulting firms similar to you that we speak to say that a lot of the time the owner or occupier of the building doesn't really know what smart is or what they want from their building. They just know that they want it.
What we're seeing is, and this is not necessarily new today, but I would say coming out of COVID, if I just sort of say COVID forward, we're seeing different market signals, different challenges our clients have. Is a challenge. Regulatory compliance is a challenge. In the commercial real estate space, return to work is a challenge. What we have focused on is more trying to achieve the problems they have and less on the tech. It is our job to know the tech. I actually don't see a lot of, I'll call it maturing of technology knowledge, particularly in the commercial real estate. I don't see it happening at pace. I see the same commercial real estate developers constantly at conferences who have been engaged in the beginning. I don't see a new cohort showing up necessarily year on year that weren't there before. So I don't know that we're actually seeing a growth in maturity on the client perspective. What I think we're seeing is strong on the challenges they're trying to overcome, where technology is well placed to solve those problems.
Yeah. It's a really interesting point. And I see even the public companies, the big HVAC companies, controls companies, they ping me and just say, Joe, we want to tell you what we're doing. We just want to get your sense. Can you spend a little time just giving us as an expert in the market, your point of view? And like the TAM, right? Like the TAM numbers, total addressable market are always gigantic, right? Hundreds of billions in some cases, tens of billions of dollars in some cases. The other thing is, depending on how you do those calculations, there is really like 2 orders of magnitude difference, I would say. And if JCI has a slide that they had been using in their investor day in earnings, it's a $400 billion opportunity. Now, again, that's worldwide. I believe that includes the actual HVAC systems, the actual control systems, and then everything that's connected and enabled, the intelligent and connected dynamic part of that above it. So that's a more expansive TAM than if you're a software company. But it's still, there's still a lot there. And I think that question, how big is the TAM, is actually not so easy to uncover. You can obviously look at how many buildings are in the US, 6 or so million commercial buildings, but it's more than that.
I mean, as I said earlier, where I'm actually seeing more client movement is in industrial real estate. We saw a strong market signal globally for a number of years that they were trying to, they being the healthcare market, was trying to get to a digital healthcare space, leverage technology to deal with stuff like nursing shortages, deal with stuff like regulatory compliance and reporting, where things like leak detection was a really strong use case for like healthcare. We see with some of the reshoring of the industrial market in that space, the kind of SCADA OT overlap, I think is strengthening, and we're going to see. I think in the U.S. market, I'm hopeful we're going to see a fairly strong industrial market, and that's strong opportunity. Whether it's new build or rent, commercial real estate, as we've talked about already, has a challenges. Number one being any building that is performing well is leased, right? So what are you going to do? Tell all the tenants to stay home for the summer and rotation? I mean, so we get into these kind of staged floor by floor, uplifts that are complicated. Where with an industrial facility, you could one whole area of the factory, put a whole new line in, upgrade everything. You see robotics taking off a lot faster than. And then the other market I think is in like transit. You're seeing a lot more reliance on technology. Market that I think is well served for like. And you guys fly, none of us is walking into that airport without, right? So you've got a user group that has already got the app. You're going through security. You got a clear user journey is clear. Technology can help. You see things like ordering from the waiting area, or like lounge the other day, and I saw with a trash can on it, and it was an automated robot. And you see that stuff taking off. I don't see that pace of change in commercial real estate.
Yeah. I mean, airlines, when you fly into a new Fly United being here in Denver, but Fly Delta, they have a lot of good wayfinding features in their apps, the actual airline app. That really need that when I fly at my home airport. And if there's certain places like New York or San Francisco that I go to a lot, but we're going to be at Realcomm in Savannah, and I don't know that I've ever been to that airport. So figuring out where to go, that could be useful.
100%. Yeah. The other market, just to touch on places where I see a lot of movement, hospitality. I'm a Marriott guy. I like that I can unlock my door with my phone, that my name's on the TV. I see a lot of movement there. So one thing that in my role, I spend a lot of time thinking about is what are these industries? What are the trends that we're seeing there? What is working? And for a client in a different industry, we take lift and shift and say, this is something you should consider.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the room key on your phone is great. I know if you go to a huge hotel, thinking of Las Vegas, I remember years ago, even a couple years ago, people said, "Oh, I was waiting in line to get my ticket, or not my ticket, my key card for an hour and a half." And like, it's bad when you come to an event for 2 days and you've just spent an hour and a half waiting in line when you actually could be at the event. And now a lot of it is just your room is ready, and there's really as much friction, if you will. So, yeah. I guess a follow-up question kind of on this topic, when you're talking to clients, and maybe it's buy of asset tree, what are the drivers for investing in technology? Is it we want to save energy, we want to decarbonize our assets, we have a huge labor shortage, we need to augment our staff with technology? Is it a little bit of everything? Do you find that there's some commonality in this industry versus in that industry asset class? But what are the core, or maybe to flip it around, like what is the actual problem that they're looking to solve in most cases that technology really can be that answer?
I think probably the biggest driver is efficiency. Sustainability rolls in on that, but doesn't want to run their portfolio more efficiently. By efficiency, I mean less human labor used to make this building run at its peak performance. And that's actually, to be clear, not saying they're trying to lay off managers. In many cases, they can't even hire and retain them. So they're looking for a way to cover labor shortage. Number two, they're looking at reducing their operating costs, through efficiency. It has the benefit of driving sustainability and net zero carbon, which I think is for many of our client types, one they have to balance with probably 3 or 4 other competing priorities. There are markets with very specific use cases that will drive airports and security. Right?
Yeah.
You consistent alignment with certain kinds of use types. And so generally what we'll do, like in an early engagement with the client, is kind of come in with, there's various versions of this chart, but like what are the 4 or 5 areas or kind of zones of focus that you as a client are trying to solve? Is it security? Is it user experience? Is it sustainability? Is it efficiency? Is it productivity? Like there's 4 or 5 things that everything kind of falls in. And it won't take very long to kind of play that out. I would say in my experience, the most consistency gets across the line is on driving efficiency in operations. Because everybody understands that you can put an ROI to it. The 330-300 rule are around for a while, but to make a claim that knowledge workers are making widgets quicker has always been a murk and a case for our clients. We've tried many different variants of, well, if you could book a decker, and there's always the question of like, well, do they really use that 5 minutes to make more revenue, or are they talking at the water cooler? And you kind of follow the area.
Yep.
So I do think we tend to lean in on the efficiency play because it's been a strong driver for our clients across the business case many times. And I think also because when you're talking to an firm about smart buildings, that is an area where we are credible. We understand how to create efficiencies. If I was going into a theme park to talk about technology to drive experience, I don't think that we would be necessarily in that space. We would maybe want to partner with somebody else who was known for that.
Very interesting. No, it's fascinating. I guess when we zoom in, is that that's a topic that I hear more partially sit. You could argue there's a lot of solutions that help manage carbon emissions, help reduce them. That maybe 10 years ago, very much into energy management because savings was viewed as maybe a more solid business case. And now I think we're going not back, but we're including again this idea, well, we want to decarbonize our assets. Is that coming up a lot? Obviously, you're designing a building, so you could look at it from the entire life cycle of the building, the entire, both the emission from all of the tertiary emissions, if you will, the materials and the construction, and then moving forward. But just where does that fit into where you see the market today?
Well, decarb is connected to the efficiency play that I mentioned before. When I think about operational carbon, you're spending less. To run the building, you're likely generating less of a carbon footprint. It is in the conversation, I would say, with most clients. it is something that it is a priority they are balancing against competing interests. So it doesn't always rise to the top and your client. One of the things that I don't know if excited is the right word, optimistic about is I see regulatory pressure markets that drive that decarbonization discussion. Where you have a free market, in many cases, the States is sort of like that, depending on the energy code. You see a little bit less of you. So the UK, Lewis, for you, if we're building a project in London, decarb is going to be at the top of the list. If there's 3 bullets, it's one of them, right? You've got regulatory compliance to calculate the embodied and operational carbon and prove it out. And I think that has driven a really strong smart buildings market in the UK and the London market, but we see it in some of the other cities. As well, you clients, if you're speaking specifically about commercial real estate, who have made decarbonization strategies, who will be buildings. So when you get that overlap, pressure on the base building and tenants who've made a commitment, yeah, it's going to be a strong component of the mission. If we're building a factory in Georgia, on the supply chain of that particular vendor's pressure on the buyers of their product, say it's an EV battery, yes, decarbonization is going to be part of the strategy because they're going to have to give an environmental, I'm not sure what it stands, product declaration, embodied carbon and so forth that sits within that product. You're going to see that's going to be part of the conversation. But there will be facilities where it is just not a priority. And, back to our conversation on meeting the client where they are, to understand where they are in their journey. And we're still doing everything that we can to make that build as good for the environment as we can, but you can't push a client past they're willing to go, unfortunately, in some cases.
Got it. See, within smart buildings and just commercial real estate technology, the segment of technology, do you fragment the difficulty of scaling solutions in this market as something that holds back further adoption, or do you just see that part and parcel with the industry as well as also just some of the other areas that WSP focuses in? Well,
I mean, the market is fragmented, although I agree with Joe's recent kind of post. I don't want to put words in. I think you see a lot of the smart buildings platforms that were stood up in the, say, 2000 to 2020 realm are consolidating into, let's call it a half a dozen players and then another maybe 2 dozen in any market, minor players that the niche. The fragmentation has not done the sort of tech space in buildings any good. A murky, it's a murky environment client to, and particularly for our clients, multiple buildings in they acquired. Name your vendor; they have them all. And so when I hear people talk about, well, does the fragmentation back? It's a reality of any client, that they have a fragmented tech stack portfolio. So I think solutions that make it easier to pull those different control systems together are gonna stand out for our clients. If we had a client who was building it from scratch, we would advise that they didn't leave. But I don't know, you guys, the one that was doing that. So generally dealing with some sort of brownfield portfolio, you might be building a lighthouse project. Say I haven't worked campus here. I see it every day. Say CU is going to put up a new building. They might do everything they can building, but the other 7 campus probably have every kind of vendor in them.
Yeah. I mean, I find generally just throughout the course of my time in the industry, every once in a while you meet an owner of real estate. It's commercial real estate because their hold slow or shorter, but hospitals, corporations, universities would all be great examples where they feel generally like they're doing great if they're down to 2 or 3 major controls vendors across, we're probably talking many dozens, if not low hundreds of buildings. And that is usually a big effort for them. There are always exceptions, but if you just talk to them about, give me a sense of what does your portfolio look like in terms of control systems, vendors, how it all works together or not. They say, oh, we've been focused for years on getting it down to 2 control vendors or 3 control vendors. And actually that is an achievement. I am not at all trying to say you're making something
in terms of maintain that.
Exactly.
But
And get to that point. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
You're only talking about BMS's smart building.
That exactly, right? Not lighting control, not access control. Yeah. Conveyance systems. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I mean, when I approach a smart building, I mean, I think, yes, we see a strong thread of BMS's smart building across the efficiency play. But to your point, Joe, lighting, critical transportation, security, access control, metering is typically a subset of BMS or maybe standalone. I understand, Lewis, which is I think the point of your question, why our owners have a hard time making a decision when they are dealing with a portfolio that's complicated. And I myself have made strong recommendations to clients where halfway through a project, the platform that we were gets acquired by another platform. They deprecate a series of features or something where we've had to sort of shift. Right now, if any client is new building or major renovation that's going to say a 2030 opening window, is focus on making sure you select are interoperable. At least one of them is going to be acquired over the course of this design and construction phase. And
yeah, just that post that Joe made recently, and not to put you on the spot, Jay, but in my view, with the fragmented, and I would say I personally would expected to see more M&A over the last 12 to 18 months, just with obviously macro trend companies who may be in this zombie stage of their business where they can't access capital markets, but also product and solution isn't good enough to be able to win new customers. Do you think we're going to head into more, or you anticipate seeing more M&A, or do you think there may be other trends that you'll see over the next 6 to 12 months?
So one of the things that's been interesting for me in my current role, and if you follow WSP over the last 6 months since we announced our last strategic cycle, I myself have also taken calls with smart buildings and the like who are potentially up for sale. Because we are now at least considering the market. It's important for our strategy to get to a place where we're credible in the operations phase. And I think there's a huge on firms to help our clients provide advice to our clients in the operating phase of their business. And historically, the consulting business has not done a lot of that. We stood up buildings and then handed it over to someone else. So I've had the unique opportunity a number of those platforms. My challenge, Lewis, is that I don't, in many cases, a lot of differentiation. And so if I look at the core smart build on, they are data points from a building, and that's kind of table stakes for any platform that would even be considered by, even if it was a control. And Joe, I know this is probably market more than I in terms of like how they look at acquisition, but I suspect they're looking for IP. None of those firms that are getting acquired have enough of an install increase any of the big's footprint. So you're looking for something unique. I just don't see a differentiation from platform A to B to C. If we're talking simply about analytics platforms that ride on top of a BMS are equal.
Yep. I mean, we actually just published some research on this exact topic. So it's a nice dovetail. One of the points I've been making even on LinkedIn is there's a lot I see focus on product differentiation, right? We have a proprietary algorithm, but they don't focus on value differentiation. So what I mean by that is you're still saving a portfolio about 10% in energy costs. Maybe there's some slight difference there, but for a buyer, they look at that and they say, well, I'm already getting that from my current platform, so why would I switch it all out to a different platform? You go deeper, you asked a little bit about the vendor landscape, the M&A landscape, and there's a lot to unpack there. We've written a lot about this. We're going to continue to write it. There are some vendors that are up into the hundreds of millions of square feet deployed. There's a lot of vendors who are in the tens of millions of square feet deployed, more on the tens than on the hundreds. Obviously, the hundreds, you can do the math of what does it probably cost a couple square foot. Those are good businesses. I would say across the entire landscape, there's two dynamics. One, none of those businesses look like they're at risk of going out of business, right? We're a company, we have tens of millions of square feet. You can keep going indefinitely. Other side of it, I think a lot of them that would consider selling their business, I think there's a mismatch in what they think they're valued and what they're actually valued. Part of that is if they raised money in 2021, 2022, multiples were higher then, significantly higher in some cases. Moreover, they might be anchoring to whatever that last round was as a number. And their view might be, I'm speculating because I haven't talked to a lot of vendors directly about this question. They might say, well, we've grown. We're bigger than we were 3 years ago, so we should be worth more. It's like, no, what you haven't grown as much as multiples have come down, is really what has probably happened. But they're also not in a position where, well, we will sell. So I think, as a potential buyer, as WSP, I think there are some opportunities there, but I also think there's probably a lot of, would be a great bolt-on, might do something that would help you, that might say, well, we'd rather not, that's the price. And I don't know what it's going to take to unlock that.
I do agree with you that I suspect we're going to see that we are seeing a mismatch in multiple on ARR versus from buyer to seller. I think the multiples, I'm not seeing alignment, and this is not just my personal experience, but I think in the business, maybe Lewis, that explains lack of pace in acquisition. I think there's some noise getting thrown in with AI. I think that companies who believe that they are on the edge of applying AI to whatever the data they are maintaining is that they should be seeing multiples like we're seeing in markets. And they might be right, but the TAM, back to your point, Joe, on like, well, how many buildings are we really going to this to, is still fixed, right? So if you think about a hockey stick, I don't know that I see like an AI-driven smart building hockey stick, because the fundamental issue from the exhibitor.
The closest thing, and I've been digging into this a little bit in the newsletter and just on my own, the closest thing to hockey, I don't think it's a hockey stick, is just how many chillers the HVAC companies are selling for AI data centers. And they all talk about it, but when you look at the numbers, there does seem to be a significant amount of growth in chillers. And I would imagine data centers is probably where it's from. But then, of course, you move to liquid cooling in the future, liquid cooling, immersion cooling, maybe we don't see as many chillers in the future. So
mission critical market is also unique in the smart building space. That's a whole separate podcast. And I think that the way those clients, particularly the hyperscalers, think about control systems, when we speak of maturity of clients, they're at the top of the mountain. They are the ultimate owner operator of a really expensive, highly consuming asset. And they are all trying to make them more efficient and to decarbonize. And they have very sophisticated, generally sophisticated about it. So my comment would be, we get chillers that we want to a hyperscaler, but I don't think we'll see a big bump in the smart building space from that.
Yeah, it's fair. That's great. Yeah, we should probably have you on another time in the future and talk more about data centers. Maybe a couple other people we've touched on data centers, so maybe we just do a data center podcast. But yeah, go ahead, Lewis. I think we want to get to rapid fire.
Yeah, let's do it. Joe, feel free to get a few out there.
Yeah. I mean, maybe first, favorite building, Jay, if you have one.
Favorite building? I'm a sucker for churches.
Interesting.
Churches in general. When I travel, I've dragged my wife into more churches over the years than any other building type. There's something about the history, the craftsmanship, and the connection to community that I always find really calming, optimistic. So like if I had to go to more often than not, I find churches to be interesting. And that goes back to I'm hearing like history of architecture and all that kind of stuff. Do I have a favorite building? I don't know that one necessarily. I mean, like one doesn't scream to mind. You find me in a building more consistently than others, probably a church.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Westminster Abbey is, I agree with that.
Yeah.
A lot of history there too.
Yeah. What's your favorite project that you've worked on?
I worked on the Atlanta Falcons football stadium, Mercedes-Benz. And to me, there was a for me where I had gotten to a point of competency that I could have and I was with it soup to nuts. So there's a sense of pride in that facility that I don't know that I'll necessarily, that my career will necessarily allow, maybe towards the end, ambition to get back into, spending that much time on a specific project. But that one for me, I had such a personal investment in it. And it's always exciting to see work on TV. And, I think that's a project that we at WSP are proud of. It was groundbreaking in terms of a first lead on this, but I think platinum stadium in the country, right? So we had a big sustainability angle. Is a fun job. That was a fun job.
Boulderite, favorite outdoor activity, favorite hobby. What would you put on that
biking.
list?
Without a doubt. But if here, I would probably be somewhere on a mountain bike.
Yeah.
Moving around.
And you also, isn't it right? You like fat tire biking in the snow? Is that?
I've found that I like it less than I used to. It is a fundamentally cold sport. I will tell you the best thing about quick plug, you get away from everything. The nice thing about a fat bike is you can ride on a group to end of it. Trails in Boulder, or in general, I'm assuming in like packed in like distance, like a non-insane human would walk out into, and that's about 4 miles, right? You're not going to get a packed trail that goes further than that, but on a fat bike, you can ride that pretty quickly. Then if you plan well, you have a set of snowshoes on your back and you can snowshoe in clean snow.
Nice. Maybe we can do that next time I'm in Boulder.
Yeah. Coming the winter's a lot of fun winters. Yeah. Yeah. If it's sunny, feel that cold. That's to Colorado. Sunny day, like a bluebird day, it doesn't feel that cold. People don't believe it, but when we were together in Telluride, there were people on the ski lift ops guys wearing t-shirts at like 11,000 feet, and it was 5 degrees, and I probably could have done it too. So
I also find on those kind of excursions, just a fitness or a personal space, I do a lot of good mental work out on the trail. You think of, there's hardly a long hike I'll do by myself when I'm not pulling the phone out and writing a note on something that I've just been percolating on. I find it's actually mentally stimulating exercise as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great.
Jay, really appreciate you joining us and to talk all things smart buildings and real estate. It's been to learn a lot from someone who's got a lot of experience over the years.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been, have me back. I'd love to come back. It's always fun to talk with people who spend as much time thinking about this stuff as I do. And Joe, as you know, I love what you guys are doing, and I was glad to be a part of it.
Yeah, thank you for joining.